All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of Interactive Wrestling Radio here on WrestlingEpicenter.com. And here we are to do another top 5 list to kick off the show, and then we'll get to our myriad of topics to discuss this week. We have a lot to talk about this week because we haven't done a show in 2 weeks. So there's a lot to talk about, and I think you guys are going to have some fun with this show. So anyway, tonight's topic, and if you'd missed our last one, it was the top 5 wrestlers who should have been world champion that never held the title. And if you haven't seen it, check it out on YouTube. It's actually a very cool little video clip that we did. I did a couple graphics for it, which I think people liked. So check it out. And if you are a fan of these segments, submit your own top 5 lists and tell us where we're wrong. And basically what we do is we each name 5, then we argue down till we only have 5 total, and we determine who are the best. And tonight, who's the best U.S. heavyweight champions of all time. Now, this is the NWA, WCW, and WWE version of the championship. This does not include your local indie that's held in a barn or something. So that's how it's going to work. We're going to do the top 5 best U.S. champions of all time. And I like the way it went last week, so who wants to go first?
All right. Hey, guys, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Nick is here with it, yes. And, Nick, did you want to give your list first?
Yeah, sure. This system kicked me out for 2
Now, I want to preface this before you start, Nick. Nick just got knocked off our phone call, and that's why he just came back in. I want to start off by saying this. This is not naming the 5 best wrestlers who had the best overall career, but who did the most and best while U.S. champion, who made that belt mean the most. And I think that's the thing that people are going to have to differentiate here on the list.
Well, it would have been useful to tell me that before I made my list.
It's, once again, information that would have been useful to me yesterday. Sorry, wedding singer quote.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Walsh.
Hey, I'm still going to throw the oddballs out there. I'm fighting for the underclassmen. I'm fighting for the underdog in these things. So you're going to hear some weird suggestions from me again this week.
So, in other words, what you're saying is if we were ranking the 5 greatest quarterbacks of all time, you would attempt to rate Trent Dilfer higher than Tom Brady because Trent Dilfer would be an oddball.
No, I might do that.
Would be on this list.
I might do that to Jeff. That's exactly right. Jeff Hostetler would be my oddball pick. Reason why? In 1991, there's no way the Giants would have won the Super Bowl without him. And there's nobody who can.
Well, you want to hear something funny? Phil Simms on NFL Network recently was listed as having one of the best Super Bowl performances of all time.
In 86 or 2000 or 91?
He didn't play in 91, 86.
So it would have to be 86. And Phil Simms, in the past I've insulted the guy, and I think that at the end of his career he was ripe for parody and insulting because he was a wuss. He was a wuss. He was sliding down and avoiding tackles and being everything that a quarterback shouldn't be. But the guy was the quarterback of the Giants from 79 to 93. I mean, cut him a little slack. He had a hell of a career and 2 Super Bowl rings to his credit. So he should be a Hall of Famer. I'll say that. He should be in the Hall of Fame, and I'm surprised he's not.
All right, stop. I'm calling an end to it. No more football discussion. It's not coming back till 2013 anyway. Let's get back to the list. Let's actually get back to the list, and I'm going to do mine. Number 5 is a bit of an old-school guy, but one of the guys who held the most, especially if you look at it in its history back to Mid-Atlantic, and that was Wahoo McDaniel. At the time when this belt was, arguably the top belt in Mid-Atlantic, Wahoo regularly won it, and he was one of the top guys to ever hold it. And if you look at the guys that he feuded with and worked with on the line of Johnny Valentine and Ric Flair, he helped to make that title mean something. And number 4 actually is Ric Flair. I think you have to, again, looking at the history of the belt with Mid-Atlantic, and, even though really kind of after he went to the World Championship, he did have a very brief, forgettable run in 96. I mean, still, if you go back to the olden days of the title when it first started, Ric Flair is one of the most important champions of all time to hold it. Then you have Ricky Steamboat because, well, hey, it's Ricky Steamboat. Look what he can do with that title. And number 2, Rick Rude. I think a lot of people forget how good Rick Rude's title reign in the early 90s was. I mean, I love that story they did when he won it from Sting, where they had the whole thing with Medusa and Lex Luger breaking Sting's leg, and then Heyman hit Sting with the cell phone when after he rallied his way back from the ambulance, I guess knocking EMTs out as he was coming back. And number one,
that was a Clash of the Champions. That was awesome.
And number one is a name that I know will probably get me blacklisted on the wrestling websites. Hey, but I'm already there anyway. Number one, Lex Luger. He had a number of reigns with the belt. He had some of the longest reigns with the championship. And he had some great matches despite what some people will tell you about Lex Luger, that he was just a body guy. He went out there and posed. Hell fucking no. Go look at the match he had with Brian Pillman at Halloween Havoc. This guy had some incredible matches. It's unfortunate that people don't remember him as a better wrestler. I think he is the best U.S. champion of all time.
I think if you look how many times he held it as well. I mean, if you look at the sheer amount of times he held it, Lex Luger and the U.S. title were pretty closely linked to each other.
Yeah, I think he held it more than anybody. I think. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure he held
the title almost as many times as he turned heel and face.
All right, I'll give my list next. Nick, your list was actually very good and somewhat close to mine. My number 5 is going to be kind of a weird one. This is a guy who I've always felt was very talented, and for whatever reason, he never gets any recognition, and I think that's because he never worked for Vince, and that's Magnum TA. He was, there's a name out of the past. Very good worker. I really enjoyed his stuff, and I believe he feuded with Tony Blanchard, and I'm sure, I've seen some of it. Their work was very good, so just because I'm a fan of the guy and he is one of those weird ones that I guess James would fight for, that I would want to see him on the list. Number 4 is Rick Rude, who Nick listed, and absolutely he was fantastic in the early 90s. And then numbers 2 and 3, I guess, are interchangeable. It doesn't really matter which one you put. Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat. It was really funny because their history with the U.S. title preceded their history with the world title, and I just think that, Ricky, Steamboat and Flair, they did a lot to establish championships during the 80s, and the U.S. title was kind of their baby early on, and obviously that great work translated into what they ended up doing with the World Heavyweight title. And my number 1 is... God, who do I have as my number 1?
Uh-oh.
Oh, here he is. Okay, Greg Valentine.
All right.
Sorry
That's
about
what I like to hear.
Yeah, the Hammer. Again, some of the guy's best work, and Greg was one of the best workers of the 80s, and he helped really establish the Intercontinental title as a major championship. He did the same with the U.S. title. His classic feud with Roddy Piper, for those of us who remember the dog collar match.
I think it was at the first Starrcade, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. I mean,
wasn't fine.
Say that again?
What's weird is that the U.S. title actually wasn't on the line in that match.
It was,
No, it wasn't, but they did end up feuding over that belt.
And they did, but the thing about that is, the weird thing about that is he was at the first Starrcade, Greg Valentine, as the champion, and he didn't defend the belt, the U.S. belt, and then he was at the first WrestleMania, also champion, Intercontinental champion at that time, and again, did not defend the belt. As far as I know,
yes, he did. It was a title match.
He did defend it against JYD. Forgive me, sorry. The match should have been
it should have been against Tito.
Exactly. Should have been Tito, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we sound like we're arguing about the Jackson brothers? Should have been Tito! Sorry. And that's going to get me some hate mail. Okay, here's my list, and it's a little bit out there with you guys. Is all right? Now, all right. I have a couple of the oddballs that I think you guys are going to agree with. But I'm going to throw the first one out there who has not been brought up, and probably for good reason, but I'll go there anyway. First time we're going to mention him, the one-star WCW made in the late 90s, Goldberg, former U.S. champion himself. That's a big time. That was the belt that kind of gave him the credibility that he needed as a stepping stone to go to the world title. So I think Goldberg was one that I'm putting on there.
I remember when he won the belt from Raven. That was a big deal, and that's the kind of thing that's missing with the titles today. I noticed that so far none of us have mentioned any of the WWE United States champions, because it doesn't matter if you hold that belt. But when Goldberg won it, it was really a big deal.
Exactly. I'm going to go next on the list was another guy that probably will get us blackballed for mentioning, but I'll mention him. Chris Benoit, former U.S. champion. Hey, you know what? Some of the stuff he had with Jeff Jarrett, and Jarrett's not on my list because I don't think Jarrett's lineage is going to be held with the U.S. title. I think his will be with the TNA organization and WCW heavyweight title. But some of the stuff that he had with Jarrett and Sid, and even trying to get something out of the green as goose shit David Flair was something really to be spoken of. It's hard to watch those matches now. In fact, I can't. But if you're going to honestly praise somebody on their body of work, I think that you got to give Chris Benoit a nod. Next is... And
if you're going to give it to, I think, the best WWE United States champion since WWE brought that title in, it would have to be Benoit.
That's absolutely true. See, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking entirely about his WCW U.S. title run.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and next, coming back for the second time on the best of list, hello, Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
You love that guy, don't you?
What was that, Nick?
No.
All right. And number 2 on
he's
my
not going to make the final list, Nick. It's okay.
Number 2.
Doing this list, if James just throws out these oddball ones, then all he did was win the title from Steve Austin and drop it to Vader.
He's Hacksaw Jim Duggan. He deserves to be on the list. I like him. I'll admit, that's the weakest of
This is going to be a weekly gag. It's like you got to work him into okay, best female performer, Hacksaw Jim Duggan.
Oh, God, best TNA match, Jim Duggan versus Jeff Jarrett.
Best TNA match was Jim Duggan versus Mike Sanders and Disco Inferno in a handicap match. Which
I'm sure that was a classic.
James.
All right, and here we are. Number 2, I'm going to double up with Nick and back up Lex Luger. I don't think you can argue that. I think he's got to be on the list if you're going to talk about the best U.S. champions of all time. And my number 1 pick, the best U.S. champion of all time, and he's going to be the guy who made it on all 3 of our lists, Ravishing Rick Rude. I don't think there was a better all-around performer, especially in WCW in the year of 1991, 1992, and 1993. The guy was just red hot. There was nothing better. And I mean, to show you how good he was, he's the only guy to appear on both Nitro and Raw on the same night. Obviously not talking about the Vince McMahon simulcast that happened in 2001, but to actually appear on storylines in both companies at the exact same time, because Raw was taped at the time and Nitro was live. And he was also, at the time, which is kind of forgotten, doing an angle with ECW. So he was involved in all 3 promotions at the tail end there of 1997. And I think that's a pretty cool thing. But that had nothing to do with the U.S. title. As far as his in-ring work, Nick mentioned it. The match he had with Sting at the Clash of Champions back in, I think it was 91, if not early 92. That was one of the best stories going in. And frankly, the U.S. title was always billed as the guy who was the number 1 contender to the world title, and when Rick Rude held that belt, everybody in the company and everybody watching the show could have easily seen him being world champion, because why the hell not?
And he was kind of, the U.S. title to him was kind of like what the Intercontinental title was to Kurt Hennig in the WWE, where it kind of became his belt. And even though, he probably could have been a world champion, but he did so well at that level, and he made that title really mean something. And it's kind of the defining championship of Rick Rude's career, because he didn't really, he was the Intercontinental champion, but he was just holding it for a few months until Warrior won it back. So, but in WCW, the U.S. title was really his.
Yeah. And he was good enough to even the Markish fans can believe that he could beat Sting, because he was just that good. So, I think that, honestly, Rick Rude deserves to be on the list. So, anyway, we've got an intricate list here, so I'm going to put Duggan there at number 1.
All right, dude, seriously, though. I mean, it's going to go on. I'm going to argue against Goldberg being on the list. Outside of his victory and his loss, what did he really do? I mean, besides the belt was more or less a part of the